Welcome back, folks, to another Pathfinder 2nd Edition review and guide. Today we're not going to be going over an archetype like usual, and instead we're going to be going over part of a class. I've been meaning to do one of these for a long time now, and I hope that they will be really useful for anyone who wants to make a Swashbuckler. Swashbucklers are my favorite class currently in Pathfinder 2e, as they're a ton of fun, have just the right amount of complexity that I like, and blend together skill usage with martial ability. They're the only class that has stylish moves literally built directly into their class features, and they're just a lot of fun to play. They're very, very flexible by nature and can fit into a wide variety of different character concepts, although pretty much all Swashbucklers are going to be frontline characters. There aren't a lot of ways to make a ranged Swashbuckler. I'm going to be splitting up this review into two different parts, as the Swashbuckler is a very complicated class with a lot of class feats, and I'm going to be going over all of those, but not today. This guide is going to be split up into two parts. This part, which you're currently watching, will be going over all of their proficiency and class features, in addition to particular skills and equipment that I feel stand out for Swashbucklers. The next part will be going over all of their class feats that are currently available. I hope that this video helps you create the character that you want to play. Let's get into it. The two simplest parts of every class is the key ability score and hit points of that class. Swashbucklers are especially simple, as they can only choose dexterity as their key ability score, which does stand out a little bit as unusual, as most martial classes can either choose strength or dexterity. This does work out pretty well for Swashbucklers though, as almost all Swashbuckler abilities only work with agile or finesse weapons, so most likely you are going to be using your dexterity a lot, so it really is useful to have a high dexterity. In terms of hit points, Swashbucklers are pretty standard for most martial characters, with having 10 hit points per level. Only barbarians are better than this, so there's really no complaining about this. Now let's go over the basic proficiencies that a Swashbuckler will get over their career from levels 1 to 20. Starting with Perception, as it's the simplest proficiency by far. You start at level 1 as an expert in Perception, and you advance to Master in Perception at level 11 with the Vigilant Senses feature. Swashbucklers have a pretty standard proficiency for a martial character, and unless you have a particularly bad or good perception, you shouldn't be too outstanding in perception amongst your party. There's nothing to complain about, nothing to particularly be happy about. Now, moving on to the saving throws, as Swashbucklers have very, very interesting saving throw proficiencies. Your Fortitude only start at Trained at level 1, and you only improve once at level 3 with the Great Fortitude class feature, which makes you an Expert. You never improve beyond Expert, so you have to be really careful about effects that require Fortitude saves, as you're never going to be very good at them. Thankfully, this isn't quite as bad as it seems, though, as you will likely have a good Constitution score due to being a frontline character. Con saves lives, and you should really have a decent one. Will saves are another bit of a weakness for the class, as though while you do start as an expert in will saves, you only improve them once as well at level 17 with the Resolve feature. While Resolve is very nice, as it allows you to turn your normal successes on will saves into critical successes, level 17 is much later than most campaigns tend to end, so most characters aren't ever actually going to get it. You'll be stuck as an expert in will saves for most of your time with your character, and your wisdom probably isn't going to be as good as your constitution, so your will and fortitude saves will probably both be an issue for you. This can be mitigated with some class feats though, but it is something to keep in mind. Both your fortitude and will saves are not going to be very good. That can't be said about your reflex saves though. You start as an expert at level 1, and at level 7 you advance to be a master at reflex saves when you get the evasion feature. All of your normal successes now turn into critical successes, and this gets even more crazy at level 13 with improved evasion. Your reflex saves are now legendary, and this is the earliest possible level that you can get a legendary save, and all of your critical failures become normal failures, and if you end up getting a normal failure on a damaging effect, you take half damage instead of full damage. This, combined with how dexterity is your key ability score, your reflex saves are going to be probably the best in the entire party. You can laugh in the face of fireballs and pretty much any effect that requires a reflex save. Skills are also very important for a swashbuckler, so we should go over those pretty quickly. All swashbucklers are trained in acrobatics, and they get a different skill trained depending on their swashbuckler style. We're going to be going over all of those styles later, but none of the skills that you can get are bad at all. In addition to those skills, you are also trained in 4 skills plus your intelligence modifier. This is actually really good amount of skills for a martial, and it can certainly make up for not having a intelligence modifier. You have plenty of ways to get trained in enough skills that you can meet pretty much whatever character concept you want. Finally, let's talk about the class DC, attack rolls, and AC proficiencies. Your class DC starts at trained and increases to expert at level 9 and further improves to master at level 19. This is alright, but swashbucklers don't actually have that many effects that use their class DC. I've played a swashbuckler up to level 15, and I think that I've used my class DC maybe once. Attack rolls, on the other hand, are exceptionally important, and you'll be using them all of the time. You follow the same proficiency as a ranger, so if you're used to that, you know what you're getting into here. You start as trained in unarmed, simple weapons, and martial weapons. Pretty standard for a martial character, like I said. At level 5, you become an expert in all of those weapon groups, and at level 13, you become a master. You never go beyond master since you aren't a fighter or a gunslinger, but this is about as good as it gets. Also, it's important to remember that while none of your class features work with them, you are perfectly proficient in ranged weapons, and you're probably going to have a good dex, so you'll be pretty accurate with them. They're useful in a pinch, but since you can't use most of your class features, you won't be nearly as effective with them. Finally, let's talk about your armor class. You start as being trained in only unarmored defense and light armor, and you improve to being an expert at level 13. Finally, at level 19, you become a master. Not being trained in medium armor seems like a downside, but remember, your key ability score is dexterity, so you will most likely have the average AC for your level no problem by meeting the maximum dexterity requirement of pretty much every light armor. Your AC will never be insane because you're not a monk or a champion, but it will be alright. Thankfully, you do have other defensive abilities that you can get that can make up for this, and you can become a very defensive character. Let's start talking about class features. I won't be going over every single feature that every class gets, like weapon specialization or skill feats or ancestry features, as all class get those, and this video is about swashbuckler specific things. We're going to be spending a lot of time at level 1, because every single swashbuckler is at level 1 at some point, so this will be useful for everyone. Also, you get your most important class features at level 1. You get to choose your swashbuckler style at level 1, but I'll be going over them more in depth later as they're very substantial. Feel free to skip to those in the chapter bar or a link in the description. The most important feature that you get at level 1 is Panache. Panache is the core of the entire class, so I'm going to be taking a good chunk of time to talk about it. Panache is all about style. It's all well and good to stab someone efficiently, but the way in which you stab them is equally as important as the act itself. This can apply to practically everything that you want to do. You don't want to stride, you want to stride with style. Whenever you succeed on something particularly stylish, you can enter a state of panache. Since saying, do something stylish, is really vague and not a very good rule, they wrote out particular rules for what would allow you to gain panache in combat. The simplest option is to succeed on a check to tumble through an opponent. Tumbling through is an already very useful action for repositioning and getting into flanks, so it's really nice to have an additional mechanical benefit for succeeding on it. You're going to have a good acrobatics because you're already trained in it, and dexterity is your key ability score, so you'll have a good chance of success. Additionally, every swashbuckler style gives at least one skill action that succeeding on gives you panache. Once again, I'll be going over all of those when I get to the styles, and I'm going to be going over them in a good amount of detail. Finally, they give a rule that allows you to get panache if you do something really cool and your GM says it's okay. Basically, if you succeed on a check to do something that is particularly daring, you can enter panache if you at least beat the very hard DC for your level. This could be anything really, as long as it's cool. I really like that this rule exists, as it allows for you to interact with your environment in a lot of interesting ways, especially if you have a lenient GM. But what do you actually get for being in panache now that you've got it? When you're in panache, you get 3 main benefits. First, you get a plus 5 foot status bonus to your speed. This increases at later levels, and swashbucklers can be just as fast as monks. Second, you gain a plus 1 circumstance bonus on checks to tumble through or actions that would give you panache that you get from your style. This is really wonderful, and it gives you a great incentive for wanting to stay in panache to better utilize your skills. Finally, you do additional precision damage from your precise strike feature. Speaking of which, let's talk about precise strike. At level 1, if you make a strike with an agile or finesse weapon, you deal an additional 2 precision damage. That doesn't sound like all that much, but it gets better. If that strike has the finisher trait, then the additional damage is 2d6 precision damage instead of 2. This damage increases as you level up. It increases by 1 if it's not a finisher, and by 1d6 if it is a finisher, at level 5, 9, 13, and 17. So the maximum bonus that you can get on a finisher strike is 66 precision damage. That is a lot of additional damage, and it can really help out your offensive damage capabilities. It's not nearly as much of a flat damage bonus as Rage grants, and it's not as consistent as Sneak Attack from a Rogue, because you can only do this on 1 attack a round. We'll get to that. But Swashbucklers can do large amounts of burst damage with their finishers when they need to. Speaking of which, let's talk about finishers, because they are important and you'll be able to get a lot of them. The finisher trait is fairly simple, thankfully. You can only use actions with the finisher trait whenever you are in panache, and whenever you use that action, you immediately leave panache. Additionally, once you make a finisher in a turn, you cannot use any other actions that have the attack trait. Finishers are a great way to deal large amounts of damage by cashing in your panache, and they always have additional effects that you get on a success. The only finisher that you have available at level 1 is Confident Finisher, which is as simple as finishers get. If you miss on your attack roll, but not critically miss, you roll your precision damage, so at level 1 that's 2d6, and you deal half of what you rolled despite missing. It's a very way to deal consistent damage, and it's fantastic if you absolutely need to get damage quickly and consistently. The next set of important class features that Swashbucklers get access to become available at level 3. The first one is the Opportune Riposte reaction. Opportune Riposte allows for you to make a melee strike against an enemy that critically fails a strike against you, so it's a way to attack back at someone who messes up whenever they attack you. It's a great way to punish people for overextending, and it really shines in situations where you're fighting a bunch of enemies that are below your level, or against enemies who use all of their actions to attack. Enemies below your level are a lot more likely to critically miss you, and if someone uses all 3 actions to attack, that third attack is going to be pretty likely to critically miss with, their multiple attack penalty accounted for. It doesn't see nearly as much use in fights against enemies that are above your level, though, as they're way less likely to critically miss you. Also at level 3, you get additional skill feats due to the Stylish Tricks feature, but that skill feat that you get can only be an acrobatics skill feat or skill feat related to the skill that your style granted you proficiency in. You get additional skill feats that follow the same sort of requirement of being an acrobatics or style-related skill at level 7 and 15. Getting bonus skill feats is always nice to have, even if they are limited. Most classes don't get any free skill feats, so this is really nice. The last level 3 feature that you get is Vivacious Speed, which can make you incredibly fast in combat. Essentially, when you're in panache, instead of getting a plus 5 foot status bonus to your speed, you get a plus 10 foot status bonus to your speed. Additionally, when you aren't in panache, you get half of your panache bonus to your speed regardless of how you're not in panache. so you're a bit faster all the time and much faster in Panache. This bonus to your speed in Panache increases by 5 at level 7, 11, 15, and 19, up to a total of a plus 30-foot bonus to your speed in Panache and a 15-foot bonus to your speed when you're out of Panache, at level 19, of course. This allows you to keep up with pretty much any character in the game, which is quite a feat because monks are really fast and you are just as fast and mobile. You can get to wherever you want to be in a combat, and you can do it without all that much issue. At level 9, you get access to a really interesting feature that I'm not going to be going over right now, called Exemplary Finisher. This applies an additional effect to all of your finisher strikes that depends on what style you chose at level 1. Since I'm going to be going over the styles in much more detail later, I will be going over the Exemplary Finisher effects for each style there. So let's move on to level 11, where you get access to Continuous Flare. Up until this point, you could never benefit from any form or benefit of Panache outside of an encounter, and Continuous Flare helps alleviate that issue slightly. Effectively, if you succeed on a check during an exploration mode that would have given you Panache in combat, you now get a +1 circumstance bonus to any further checks that would give you Panache if you were in combat. This effect ends whenever the scene changes, which is basically whenever the GM says that the scene changes, and it also ends if the exploration mode turns into an encounter. You unfortunately can't get all of the benefits from being in Panache, so you don't get your speed bonus, but that +1 can be significant whenever this feature does come up. I personally don't feel like it comes up all that often in the games that I'm playing in, but that might just be the games that I'm playing in. At level 15, you get access to Keen Flare, which basically gives you a free weapon rune on all of your attacks. If you roll a 19 on a strike that you have Master Proficiency in, which is all simple martial and unarmed attacks at this point, and it isn't already a critical hit after you add your total to the 19, but it is a hit, it is now a critical hit. Basically, your natural 19s are treated like natural 20s in that they improve the success of a normal hit, but it doesn't improve a miss or a critical miss. This is exactly the effect of the Keen rune, and it is really, really useful. In my experience, it's not all that unusual to run into enemies where the only way to get a crit is to roll a 20. This changes that around a lot, and basically doubles your chance to crit in those kinds of situations. The final class feature that you get access to becomes available at level 19. Part of it is that your class DC improves to Master, but the second part is a lot more interesting. Whenever you strike as a part of a finisher or an opportune riposte, you can give the strike the failure effect of Confident Finisher. Basically, all of your finishers deal half their precision damage on a miss, which at this point is 66 divided by 2, and your opportune ripostes deal 3 precision damage on a miss. This is alright for the opportune riposte, but it's fantastic for your normal finishers, because now all of your finishers deal damage even on a miss, which makes them exceptionally consistent. There is a feat that improves this further, but I'll be going over that in the next video, because it's a class feat, and I go over the class feats in the next video. It did take a little while to get here, but we're finally ready to talk about the Swashbuckler Styles. These define your character more than any other decision that you make as a swashbuckler, as it affects your skills, finishers, and your panache. All of these styles are good and have their own specialties and niches that they fill, and you can definitely make a viable character with any style. There's no need to worry about what is quote-unquote the best, just pick whatever fits your character concept best and really will bring the character alive. Let's jump right into things. The Battle Dancer style is based on the concept of combat being an art form, and you can turn every single fight into a dance, where you're the leading performer. As you can guess, if you chose Battle Dancer as your style, you become trained in performance at level 1. Additionally, you also receive the fascinating performance skill feat. This feat gives you the benefit of whenever you use the action to perform, you can choose an observing target, and if you exceed their will DC with your performance check, they become fascinated with you for 1 round. You can also do this in combat, but you must critically succeed instead, and your check gains the incapacitation trait. Additionally, as you increase your proficiency in performance, you can target more and more targets at the same time without increasing the number of actions that you have to use. Also, once you succeed on someone, they are immune to it for 24 hours. Unfortunately, Fascinate isn't all that powerful of a condition, as it goes away the instant that anyone takes a hostile action against the fascinated creature or any of their allies. Thankfully, you get a lot more out of succeeding Fascinating Performance than most characters do, as upon succeeding, you enter Panache. This is surprisingly effective for a couple of different reasons. First, it allows you to target a character's will DC in addition to their reflex DC. This means that you can choose whichever you think is lower and then decide whether or not you want to tumble through or try and perform to get Panache, whichever you think has a better chance of success. The second benefit is that Perform doesn't have a range, meaning that you can use Fascinating Performance on any character who is an enemy who is observing you. So if there's someone 100 feet away, you can still Fascinating Performance against them. Pretty much any other action that the other styles get that can put them into Panache either are restricted to foes within their reach or who are within 30 feet. Perform having a much longer reach allows you to have a lot more flexibility in combats. Finally, you can target multiple creatures with the Fascinating Performance, and you only have to beat one of their will DCs to get Panache. Additionally, there's a really good acrobatics feat that synergizes with the Battle Dancer amazingly. Acrobatic Performer. This allows you to use acrobatics instead of performance on checks to perform, which basically means you don't need a good charisma. You don't even need a good performance. All you need is acrobatics. This means that you don't actually have to be a charismatic performer, and it reduces the amount of skills that you need to increase. The final effect of being a battle dancer is the exemplary finisher effect that you get. It's really quite simple. After you perform your finisher, you can take a step for free. This is exceptionally powerful, despite its simplicity, as one of the best ways to increase your survivability is to just not be next to any enemies. By taking a step away from an enemy who doesn't have reach, they are either forced to attack someone else or to use one of their actions to step, and either way, you've increased your survivability substantially. Also, you don't have to use this defensively, as you can instead step into a flank or just into a, in general, more advantageous position. Overall, Battle Dancers are really quite strong. It doesn't have all that many abilities that negatively impact the opponent, like most of the other styles, but that doesn't mean that it isn't strong. It's very versatile and can be used in pretty much every single situation. The next style up is the Braggart. Braggarts are all about being intimidating and capitalizing on your foe's fear. All Braggarts are trained in Intimidate at level 1, and upon succeeding on the Demoralize action, they enter Panache. The Braggart is quite simple, but Demoralize is already really strong, so that isn't at all a problem. Frightened is one of the strongest conditions in the entire game, as it produces pretty much everything that a character can do, so getting additional benefits for applying it is always going to be great. There are a couple of downsides though. It does introduce a feat tax where you pretty much have to take the Intimidating Glare skill feat, as you're bound to run into creatures that you don't share a language with, and if you don't take it, it'll be significantly harder to get Panache. Additionally, enemies that are immune to mental effects and fear effects will be way harder for a Braggart to face, since they won't be able to use Intimidate to get Panache at all. Though against everyone else, Braggarts can target Will DC and Reflex DC just like Battle Dancers. The exemplary finisher effect for Braggarts is also focused around Demoralize, and it helps alleviate an issue that you will likely run into. Once you demoralize a target, they become temporarily immune to your Demoralize attempts for 10 minutes. This can be really annoying if you're fighting a single enemy. After you demoralize them once, you limit the ways that you can get Panache. Fortunately, once you hit level 9 and get Exemplary Finisher, whenever you hit a target with a finisher, you remove their temporary immunity to Demoralize attempts. Now you can get Panache from them again using Demoralize, and your options are much less limited. Braggarts are plenty strong, and can use their features in pretty much all situations, barring a couple of exceptions. The Fencer style is probably the most grounded in reality. You become trained in deception and get panache whenever you successfully feint or create a diversion. Both of these actions are great ways to get an enemy to be flat-footed to you, but since they target the perception DC of a creature, you might have a bit of a harder time succeeding compared to other styles that target the will DC. Generally, creatures have pretty good perceptions, and they don't necessarily have good wills. Also, keep in mind that while create a diversion can be used on all enemies in a combat, once an enemy has it used on them, they get a +4 bonus on their perception DC if you want to try again. This means that you're probably not going to succeed a second time because a +4 is a huge bonus. The exemplary finisher effect that a fencer gets does overlap a bit with feinting and creating a diversion though, as it makes enemies flat-footed until the end of your next turn. This can be really useful because it means that the rest of your party can benefit from an enemy being flat-footed despite them not being in a flank or having any other conditions. It does put you in a weird spot though, as it means that if you successfully hit someone with a finisher, they're now flat-footed to you. But you're no longer in panache, so you're going to probably want to succeed on either a tumble through, a feint, or to create a diversion. But if you feint or create a diversion against them, they don't get any more flat-footed than they already are, so it kind of reduces the effectiveness of a feint, which is just a little bit weird to me. Overall, Fencer is the simplest of all of these styles in my mind. Feinting and create a diversion are great actions already if you have a good deception, and getting additional reasons to use them is just the cherry on top. It's nothing out there, it's nothing crazy or wacky, and that's just fine. I'm now going to be leaving alphabetical order here to talk about the wit style next, for reasons that you will eventually see when we talk about the gymnast. The wit style is all about being off-puttingly charming, while fighting with stupid one-liners, and I love it. The wit swashbucklers are trained in diplomacy and gain the bon mot skill feat. Bon mot allows for you to make a joke or one-liner as you roll a diplomacy check against the target's will DC that is within 30 feet. On a success, they are so off-put by your quip that they take a -2 penalty to will saves and perception checks for 1 minute, or until they spend an action responding to what you just said. The effects are a -3 on a critical success, and bon mot has fantastic team synergy. If some of your other party members use a lot of effects that require will saves or are against perception DC, they will really thank you for making their job a lot easier. Also, you can capitalize on this yourself. Just because you don't get panache for demoralizing someone doesn't mean that you can make a funny quip at them and then try and intimidate them. As you might have guessed from the trend from the previous styles, if you succeed on a bon mot attempt in combat, you enter panache. The wit style is very, very powerful, but it does have one substantial weakness. Bon mot is a linguistic effect, meaning that if you ever fight anything that doesn't know a language that you know, you cannot use it. Most swashbucklers aren't going to have a very high intelligence, so they probably aren't going to start off knowing all that many languages, so this can really get in your way. How much this impacts you will depend a lot on your campaign though. If you stay mostly in one area, this probably won't affect you as much as there's probably going to be one common language within a region. But if you travel all over the place, then you're more likely to run into people that you can't make silly quips at because they don't understand what you're saying. Also, you're always going to end up fighting animals at some point, and they'll never understand how funny your quips are. There is a way around this, fortunately, with a level 1 class feat, but it's something to that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to be going over it in the next video because, well, I don't have enough time to go over all the class feats. Finally, wit swashbucklers' exemplary finisher effect greatly improves their survivability once they hit level 9. Once you hit an enemy with your finisher, all attack rolls that target makes against you suffer a -2 circumstance penalty until your next turn. This is obviously amazing, as -2 is very substantial. It gets even better since it increases their chance of critically missing you, which allows for you to make an attack roll against them using Opportune Riposte. Wit swashbucklers are a ton of fun to play and to play with, and I really encourage you to check them out. The final style to talk about is the Gymnast, and it stands out from the rest as being pretty different, as you have no reason to actually be charismatic. As you might have noticed, all of the other styles give you trained proficiency in a charisma-based skill. Gymnast is a bit different, because we've run out of charisma-based skills at this point, so instead, you become trained in athletics, and enter panache anytime that you succeed on a trip, grapple, or shove. The power of these actions is pretty self-evident to anyone who has personally experienced a character who specializes in tripping and grappling and shoving. Prone enemies will have a lower AC and attack rolls, and they also risk triggering attacks of opportunity if anyone in the party has them, as standing up is a move action. Grabbed or restrained enemies have greatly reduced action economy, as they probably want to escape and they have a flat check to automatically fail with particular actions, and their AC is also lowered. Finally, shove isn't as useful in all fights, but whenever there is a particular situation where it's useful, it's amazing. Pushing someone off of a cliff is always going to be fun, and also sometimes you just have to shove someone through a doorway so the rest of your party can get through. Additionally, while tripping a target is based against reflex saves, grappling and shoving are against the fortitude DC of a creature. Unfortunately, being able to target both isn't quite as good as it sounds though, as most creatures are going to be having a pretty good fortitude save, since just as a part of creature design, most creatures have a good constitution, so they are able to stick around for long enough in a combat to do whatever cool thing that they can do. It's just how creatures are made. The real downside of the Gymnast archetype is that trip, grapple, and shove, while all are amazing, are attacks. This means that if you gain panache by tripping someone, if you then make a finisher against that person on the same turn, you have to deal with your finisher having a multiple attack penalty. Generally, you don't want your finisher to have a multiple attack penalty because you're spending panache to make it, so you really don't want to miss. Also, if you make a finisher at a turn, then you are completely unable to gain panache by using trip, grapple, or shove for the remainder of the turn, because finishers prohibit you from making attack actions after, you make a finisher. This can be worked around though, even if it is really annoying and does limit your options a lot. Probably the biggest benefit of being a gymnast is that you don't need a good charisma. All you need is a good strength to be able to make good use of your athletics, and it opens you up for a lot more character opportunities that otherwise wouldn't necessarily work, because all the other styles have to be charismatic to make it work. Or, you can still make a charismatic gymnast, I'm not going to stop you. Finally, the exemplary finisher effect of gymnasts is a bit weird, and it might not come up all that often. Pretty much, it's whenever you hit a creature that is grabbed, restrained, or prone with a finisher, you get a circumstance bonus to your damage roll equal to double your weapon damage die. This is an alright increase to damage, but the issue is that this probably isn't going to be coming up all that much unless other people in your party also apply these conditions. In my experience, prone creatures will almost always take the action to stand up, so they won't be prone by the next time that your turn comes around. And grappled and restrained creatures are almost certainly going to be trying to escape, and often they'll succeed by spending a bunch of actions. This means by the time that your turn comes around, that condition might no longer be on the enemy to make a finisher against them, unless someone applied it when it wasn't your turn. You can, of course, always make your finisher right after you trip or grab the enemy, but then you'll have to deal with a multiple attack penalty. Whenever it does come up, though, this is a pretty huge increase to damage, and you'll have some really, really deadly finishers. Overall, the Gymnast stands out as being a pretty weird style. It doesn't require being charismatic, and it's almost harder to get into panache sometimes because all of your actions are attacks, and you don't want to reduce the effectiveness of your finisher. It has other considerations that it has to make compared to the other styles, but that does not make it at all worse, and in my opinion, you can make the best grappler and tripper in the entire game with a Gymnast Swashbuckler. Before we end this guide, I feel like I should mention a few things that I find would be useful, especially for people that don't like to just trawl through equipment lists like I do. First, weapons. The rapier is the gold standard of weapon that people think of whenever they imagine a swashbuckler, but you don't have to just use that because it's quote-unquote the best. Whips are really, really great, especially if you don't mind dealing non-lethal damage since they give you reach. They have the non-lethal trait, but there are ways to get around that if you really want to. Also, the Elven Branch Spear that just came out in Grand Bazaar is another great way to have a finesse reach weapon. Also, never forget, if you really need to quickly do some non-lethal damage, you can always do a finisher with an unarmed strike, and it won't do probably as much damage, but it will be non-lethal. Moving away from weapons, I just want to point out the Daredevil boots, both for players and GMs. Once you get to an appropriate level, they are probably one of the best items for swashbucklers in the entire game, as they give an item bonus to acrobatics checks and a circumstance bonus on checks to tumble through. They are a really fantastic way of increasing the reliability of getting panache in combat, and the additional benefit of making you a bit better at surviving falls, which, yeah, swashbucklers are risky characters, and they're probably going to be falling maybe a little bit more than other characters if they, take a bunch of risks. Next, because I'm bad at organizing these guides, I want to talk about skills. Obviously, the two most important skills for all swashbucklers are acrobatics and whatever skill is tied to your style, but that is not all. No swashbuckler feat is limited to a particular style. There's no prerequisite wit swashbuckler. Instead, it'll say prerequisite trained in diplomacy. If you're a wit swashbuckler, you certainly have the charisma needed to be intimidating, so you can get trained in intimidation and pick up a lot of feats that synergize well with demoralizing, because those feats are there for the braggart swashbuckler, but you can also use them. Swashbucklers can be good at all different types of skills, and I encourage you to not just lock yourself into one archetype, because that's what, quote-unquote, your subclass commands you to do. You don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want. Finally, because I had nowhere else to really put these, here's some final thoughts. First, swashbucklers really rely on finishers to deal damage, so if you can't get panache, you're going to be in a really rough spot where it's hard to contribute significantly to the combat. If you're fighting a single creature that's 2 or 3 levels higher than you, you're going to be in a really rough spot where it's hard to actually succeed on any skill check versus their save DCs. If you're in a boss fight or something, think about getting panache from the other lower level enemies, as it's going to be a lot more reliable, and hopefully there's other lower level enemies because that makes for a more fun combat. Anyway, moving on. Also, since you rely on precision damage so much, dealing with creatures that are immune to it, like oozes, can be really, really rough since most of your damage dealing abilities do nothing. If you're in a party and you have a rogue, an investigator, and a swashbuckler, and then you run into an ooze, that party's going to have a rough time because all of those characters rely on precision damage to deal all of their damage. So, just from personal experience, maybe talk to your GM and say, hey, are there going to be a lot of oozes in this campaign? And if there are, just know what you're getting into first. Finally, a little bit of self-promotion. Both the acrobat archetype and the martial archetype work wonderfully with the swashbuckler, and I honestly think that they are worth taking for basically any swashbuckler. I've got videos going over these both on my channel, and I recommend that you check them out. The acrobat archetype will give you free scaling proficiency in acrobatics and a bunch of other benefits, and the martial archetype really benefits from having a good charisma and a good diplomacy or intimidate. I really recommend that you go and check those videos out. Anyway, that's all that I have for final thoughts and just quick tips. The Swashbuckler is a very fun class, both to talk about and to play. I hope that you've learned something useful today and that you'll tune in next time for the next part, where I'm going to be going over all of the class feats that the Swashbuckler gets. There's a lot of them. It's going to be a very long one. If you've enjoyed this video, then please leave a comment down below saying that, and a like on the video. It really does help me a lot when figuring out what people actually want to see from me, so it is very, very useful. I'm not just saying that because I have to. If you want to see what I'm putting out next, then feel free to subscribe. Until I see you next, live a wonderful life.